Hello, welcome to what I'm hoping is going to be a super cozy recommendations video. I have a very spooky beverage of choice with me today. It's a water, terrifying, and we're going to be going through some of my horror book recommendations. So I've got a stack of, I think, 16 books next to me. These are not all horror books that I own, but they are a good chunk of the ones that I have read. I have not included Gothic horror. I kind of have, actually. Maybe I should add more to this stack. I've got some Gothic horror. I'm going to add more. Wait, hang on, I'm going to make the stack bigger. Okay, I've just added 2 more in, so now it's 18 books. Okay, so this is mostly horror, some Gothic horror. Some of these books I am in the middle of. Well, two of these books I'm in the middle of at the moment, but the rest of them I have read. There is still a lot of horror on my TBR, so I will be creating a lot of content around reading that, especially through October, but also just other months as well, because horror isn't just for October. But today I'm going to be talking you through some of my horror recommendations, because I've fallen into this genre a lot in the last few years. I've always enjoyed Gothic horror, but I've really been trying to get on board more with horror at the moment and just really enjoying that process. It's such an interesting genre to read about because it's got so many clear story arcs and directions that the plot takes that it's in ways predictable, but in other ways completely unpredictable because you never know how it's going to get there. Some books turn it on its head and do it completely differently, and they always find a way of surprising you, and I just think that there's something really brilliant in that. So let's get into my recommendations. We're going to get the typical ones out the way. The king of horror, Stephen King. First up is The Shining. I am currently in the middle of this. I have watched the film for this, watched it years ago, still remember it but don't remember the exact details. I know that Stephen King does not like the film adaptation of this book, and I can see why, because the book is such a different vibe. The film, I don't really like any of the characters. I don't really sympathise with any of the characters, whereas in the book you get a little bit more of a base to the characters and you get a bit more context to their story, so you feel like you're a little bit more invested in what's happening with them. This is following a family whose dad takes a job at a hotel over the winter. There's nobody there, it's very isolated, and the whole family goes to the hotel to live there. There's some stuff that starts happening. The child has some kind of ability to see these extra things that is called the shining, and that is happening at the same time as this kind of cabin fever setting in and the slow deterioration of the sanity of our main character. It's a really interesting reading experience because you're seeing these two things happen parallel, the deterioration of our main character and also his son and everything that he's experiencing with being able to see these things around the hotel. So it's got some really interesting themes to it, and I am definitely enjoying the book more than I expected to, reflectively on my enjoyment of the film. Like, I liked the film, but I didn't love it, whereas the book I'm just finding is gripping me a hell of a lot more. So this one is really good if you want that isolated, cold, wintry setting. It has all of that. It has the slow build, it has the creepy atmosphere with the little nods to things that are happening and that build up to get more and more intense. This is the book for you. Gotta include this absolute massive beast of a book on this TBR. This is It by Stephen King. This is the story of a group of children who are tormented by Pennywise the clown over their years as children and into adulthood as well. This is a beast of a horror. This plays on your fears as a human, and I think that is where the horror lies in this. Pennywise the clown is definitely very creepy and a scary character, but playing on the fears and the nightmares of others, I think, is really where the true psychological fear element comes into this, and I think that's where it's really clever. I really liked this. When you've got a book this big, you really have to keep it going, and I think the pacing that King does moving this through our characters' lives just makes it really compelling and makes it really interesting to keep going with. So I had a really good time reading this one. If you want something, I would say, that's going to be a long journey, you're going to get a kind of lifetime experience for these characters. You're going to really see into their minds and their thought processes with things. You're going to get to know them. It's definitely very brutal at times. There's some quite unpleasant scenes to read about in this, especially things that are happening to the children in this book, so do check out trigger warnings if you feel you would need to for this. In fact, you know what? I'm doing a horror recommendations video. A lot of these books are going to have some quite heavy trigger warnings next to them, so just keep that in mind if you're going to read any of these. But this one, yeah, this one's got a lot going on, a lot of fear and elements to it. It was a great read, so this has to be on my recommendations video. Last year I read Susan Hill for the first time. This is The Small Hand. Susan Hill is the author of The Woman in Black, which I have on my TBR for this October. This one actually did successfully give me the fear a little tiny bit. I am searching for a book that's going to make me feel scared. I have not really found a book that's consistently made me feel scared in the way that a film has, but this book has come close with moments of fear, which is why I picked it up, because it's called The Small Hand. You know there's going to be some kind of creepy small hand moment, and there was, and it freaked me out. This is following an antiquarian bookseller who stumbles across an abandoned Edwardian house. Within this house's grounds, he feels the presence of a child holding his hand. That's where the creepy bit comes in. And he is kind of haunted by nightmares of this place and wants to look into it and understand what its history is and what this kind of presence is. It's short, it's atmospheric, and it's a good October spooky read. The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This one I also read last year. This is a classic. There is a TV show adaptation of this, but I think it's actually pretty different from the book itself. The book is following a group of people who go to this haunted house, basically knowing that it's potentially haunted, to research into it and see if it is haunted. Naturally, some spooky supernatural things are happening in this house. This definitely actually also gave me the fear a little bit, because I like it when you can't see the thing that is scary. I think when it's suggestive for such a long time in the book, that's what builds the atmosphere for me, and that's what I find to be the most kind of goosebumpy feeling, when you're not quite sure what it is that's causing that fear. And this did that really well. Plus having the build up of multiple different characters reacting in different ways and how their fear affected each other, I think was a really good tactic as well. So this is great. It's a classic. I do have another Shirley Jackson on my TBR for October, so I'm hoping that that book is just as good as this one. I think I should have saved this book till later on in the video, because this is one of my all-time favourite books ever. Now, not just favourite horror, just favourite books ever, but I'm just picking off the top of the stack as they come. This is The Last House on Needless Street by Katrina Ward, and this is fantastic. This is following a woman whose younger sibling has gone missing years and years ago, and she has returned to the area where there was some suspicion linked to this disappearance to try and get some answers. At the same time as this, we're following someone else who lives on that street as well, who seems to have some secrets that they're hiding. Honestly, from start to finish, this book just kept me guessing. I had no idea what direction it was going to go. It was incredibly interesting to read about. It was just fascinating. The twists and turns and roller coaster experience that this book takes you on is just unlike anything I've read before, and it was just an instant favourite for me. It completely compelled and gripped me. This definitely has thriller elements to it as well. It's the pacing. It's just so clever. It's so tense. The narratives that you're following and the insights into those characters you get to see just completely builds everything to make every single oh my god moment just a capital letter oh my god moment. It's just so good, and I can't really tell you anything more about it than that, because I don't want to accidentally say anything that would be a spoiler. Trust me, this is fantastic. Everybody needs to read it. I loved it. It was just so good. It was so good. I don't even want to tell you any of the kind of topics discussed in this, because we're not going to go near spoiler territory. So read this, it's fantastic. Another fantastic one is Grady Hendrix, The Final Girl Support Group. Grady Hendrix writes some fantastically interesting horror novels. This one definitely takes a different turn to their other writing. This is following a group of final girls, women who have survived horrendous things happening to them and have all formed a support group to try and talk through the things that happened. We're following our main character, who is somebody, she doesn't like to leave her house. She's very, very protective once she's in there, and she's just kind of had this as a part of her life for years and years and years. And then somebody starts killing off the final girls, and she decides she's going to find out what's happening. This was so much fun. I kind of want to reread this one now I'm talking about it out loud. If you like slasher films and the final girl trope, you're going to love this. This is a fantastic homage to any film like that, and I had such a good time with it. This has just made me realise there's another book I haven't added to this recommendations video. I'm making it 19 books now. I'm adding another one. This is just, it's so good. The way that it incorporates the typical trope of the final girl at the same time as like being a satire of that trope as well. So fast paced, so action packed. You just need to know what's happening. You are constantly guessing. It's so good. Both of these two, the best horror books I read last year, and just probably ever. They're just both fantastic, and you need to read both of them. I love them. They're great. Last year, I read Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. I did not love this book, but I'm including this video anyway because other people may like it. This is a horror, but it's also a coming of age novel. It's following two young boys who get sucked into the strangeness of this carnival circus type thing that's come to their town. They're on the cusp of kind of being boys to young men and like or children to teenagers. I'm not really sure what age they are, to be honest, I've forgotten. The blurb describes them as trembling on the brink of manhood, so it doesn't really give a specific age. But this circus is very creepy and your dreams can come true, but at a price. It's got some interesting conversations in it. The atmosphere has stayed with me. I can still see it clearly in my head, but I just found it a little bit for me. It was kind of slower. The pacing was much more centric around the fact that it was coming of age and kind of telling that story rather than making it an intense horror. So it was okay. I didn't hate it, I didn't love it, but you know, I'm putting out the recommendations video anyway because somebody else might like it, so that one. Sour Candy, absolutely miniature book this. This is by Keelan Patrick Berg. This one is so strange. This is following a character who sees a boy in a supermarket who is being really loud and naughty, and then something happens to the woman that he is with and the boy suddenly becomes this man's son. He just appears and is like this man's son, and everyone thinks that he's this man's son, and he can't work out why this is happening or how to get rid of this child, and this child is basically kind of just becoming a parasite in his life because he doesn't really know what's happening there or how to shake him off. This is a very quick, fast-paced novel that's very strange, and it was really interesting. I really liked it. It played on the kind of idea of when no one believes you of something, how that's affecting your brain and your mental health and how that's changing this guy's life around him and how isolated that is for him. So it kind of plays on the isolation horror, but in a very different way. It was really interesting, very, very fleeting and fast story. Obviously, it's absolutely miniature. I mean, how many pages is it? It's about 70-something pages. 75, 74 pages. It's very creepy and unsettling in places, which I think is the best kind of horror because it makes you kind of want to read it at a distance over there because of how it makes your skin crawl, and that's a great trait of a good horror. I'm going to kind of go through these next three as one collective discussion because CJ Cooke is fantastic. I read The Nesting last year and have since also read The Ghostwoods and The Lighthouse Witches. Is there a fourth? Or is that it? I think that's it. This is kind of classed as not a trilogy, but like 3 books to be considered together. They are all separate, but The Nesting was the first one that I read from CJ Cooke and completely pulled me in. This is following a woman who gets a nanny job and moves to Norway? Yes, deep in the forests of Norway, and there is something creepy around these forests that's getting closer and closer, and she's trying to look after the children and also seeing these creepy things happening. It's very atmospheric, especially in that isolated setting. Again, that isolated horror. Really, really enjoyed this, and then this got me onto CJ Cooke's writing, so then I read The Ghostwoods and The Lighthouse Witches, which I'm kind of briefly touching on here because they're not the same kind of level of horror as The Nesting. The Nesting is very much just horror, whereas these two have gothic horror elements and are more focused on kind of that slower build, the witchy atmosphere as well. So I'm going to mention them in here, but not talk about them too much because they're not horror in the same way that the rest of these books are. But CJ Cooke as a writer does some fantastic build up and really suspenseful stuff, so I would highly recommend their writing. A recent read for me is Kaylin Bayron's You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight. I read this one last week. This was so good. This is another homage to slashers. It is set in a camp where people recreate a slasher experience as part of a game, but that experience becomes all too real for the characters in this book. This is another really short book, so the pacing is just immediately very fast. You're thrown into the action, there's lots going on. You still get a chance to know the characters, though I think sometimes when a book is really short it doesn't give you that chance to build up the investment in the plot or the characters, but you do with this, and you feel very invested. It's very tense. You don't know what's going to happen, you don't know who's going to live and who's going to die. It does have that kind of final girl trope running through it as well, which I really like that in books because, again, it kind of adds to what I was saying at the start of this video. Horror has these very clear tropes to it, but yet you don't know how they're going to get there, and that is what pulls you in and intrigues you. This was really good. I think the spin on the camp setting was really enjoyable, and it just felt a little bit different while still sticking to those key tropes. So I really liked this one. I'd highly recommend this. Obviously, I'm highly recommending these books. They're in my recommendations video. We're going to talk about Rebecca next by Daphne du Maurier. This is a gothic horror. This is one of the ones I got to add in. This is a really atmospheric story. I watched the film for this years ago and really loved that, and it really stuck in my head. It's recently been remade and that version is also good, but I feel like nothing can beat the original. This is following a woman who goes to live with her new husband in his huge house, Mandalay, but the presence of his ex-wife, Rebecca, is still lingering. Our main character remains very anonymous throughout this. She doesn't even get a name. Rebecca sits as our title character and kind of holds all of that glory, and we basically see everything through our main character's eyes and learn about Rebecca through what she is told about Rebecca and what happened to Rebecca and why this kind of presence of her is still around the house. It's a really good atmospheric read. It is slower. Gothic horror always does tend to be, because it's more about building the atmosphere than it is about the high stakes of the plot. It's much more seeped in the slow, spooky build-up, which I think just works in a really brilliant way to create this unsettling feeling. So this is great. This is one of my favourite gothic horrors. Might as well talk about the other gothic horror whilst we're here. We've got Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is fantastic. This one's talked about a lot as a gothic horror. This is following our main character who, her cousin, is it her cousin? It's been quite a few years since I've read this one. Yes, her cousin is newlywed and has moved to the house of her now husband. She writes a distressing letter to our main character asking her to come right away. Our main character does, and realises there's something very creepy going on around this house. This is very unsettling, very uncanny, and has a lot of uncomfortable moments in it. I'm not going to tell you what the main horror element in this is because I don't want to give spoilers, but I think it's done in a really gripping and unsettling way, and just generally that is the theme throughout this whole book. You feel very invested in our main character's safety. You want to yell at the book to make sure that they're okay. It was a great reading experience and a really, really good gothic horror. Then we have White Smoke by Tiffany D. Jackson. I retain that YA is scarier than adult horror at times, because this, out of all the books I'm talking about, made me feel the most scared. This is following a family who moved to this new area that's basically this new estate that's being built up, and they're some of the first people to live there. There's something creepy surrounding it. There's kind of a lot of unspoken things happening in this that you know there's probably more to it than you're being told, and more than our main character is being told. And there's some very creepy goings on around this house, and our main character is slowly discovering that, and it's very unsettling. It's very spooky. It's just, it gives all the vibes that you want from a horror. It's got the build-up, it's got the atmosphere, it's got the tension, it's got the kind of moments that you don't want to be reading it in the dark on your own and hear a spooky noise in the corridor of your flat. It's great. It's really, really great. If you want something that is going to scare you, I think this is your closest bet. I think it just does this in such a good way. If anyone has any recommendations for anything like this, please let me know, because I haven't found anything since that's given me the feeling that this did. I think it's the suggestion of fear that gets me the most. I like having the fear revealed, but the suggestion and that build-up is the thing that I find the scariest. We've got a couple of Grady Hendrix coming at you now. We've already done one Grady Hendrix, but I have quite a few Grady Hendrix because I just really enjoy them as a writer. We have Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. This, I mean, the whole concept of this book is superb. It's literally like an IKEA catalogue. It's just great. It's such a unique reading experience because of the format, but also because of the story. It's set in an IKEA-esque store where our main character is doing a night shift and realises there's some hauntings in this store. This did give me the fear a little bit in places. It was really interestingly built up and very creepy. I think it's made even creepier by the fact that it's such a familiar setting that you as the reader can kind of put yourself there quite easily, and that suspense and that tension can be very quickly built because of that. It's just so unique. I think the format of it, each like chapter starts with a different piece of furniture and some of them get rather sinister, and I love that about it. It just made it a completely different reading experience, and it was great. It was really unique, really strange. The idea of this haunted store instead of a haunted house It was fantastic. Another Grady Hendrix, shockingly, is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. This is the first Grady Hendrix that I read. I think reflectively this is at the lower end of my favourites list for Grady Hendrix, but I still did find it really interesting. This is following a small town. Our main character, her sanity is found in her book club that she goes to. Every day is very much the same, and then somebody new moves to town and children start to go missing. And our main character is the only one kind of questioning whether this is linked to the new man that's moved to town, and she decides to start doing some digging around that. This has those small town vibes. It's got the threat of the missing children, but also it's got this kind of introduction of who this man is and what's going on with him, and whether our main character's doubts are founded. Grady Hendrix's writing is always really fun because they take a kind of typical route within the horror genre and then they kind of flip it upside down and go a different direction with it, and I really like that in their stories. So this one does that really well. So I think for me this was a great introduction to Grady Hendrix's writing, and obviously made me want to read more from them. The final Grady Hendrix book on this list is How to Sell a Haunted House. This is following a sibling duo whose parents have passed away and they have to go back to their family home to pack up the stuff. And there is something very strange and haunted-esque, but in a different way, because of course it's Grady Hendrix happening there. This is my least favourite Grady Hendrix, unfortunately. I just didn't click with this one. I haven't yet read My Best Friend's Exorcism. That is on my TBR, hopefully maybe for this month. I don't know, I've got so many books I want to read this month, but I would like to get to that one. This one just did not grip me in the way I hoped it would. I think it had some good spooky elements, but it kind of almost revealed it too quickly. And then what was actually the main crux of the horror I didn't find to be scary. There were moments that made me feel very uncomfortable because of personal things I don't really enjoy reading about that were in this book. But other than that, I just felt a little bit underwhelmed by it, unfortunately. I was really hoping for something great and it didn't do it for me. However, again, similar to Something Wicked This Way Comes, I'm putting this on this recommendations video because for somebody else, it might be the perfect book for them. And I have seen people have enjoyed this. It just wasn't one for me, unfortunately. But I do really like Grady Hendrix's writing and I will continue to read pretty much anything they write because I enjoy it. Just this one, it wasn't it, unfortunately. The final book for this video is The House at Phantom Park by Graham Masterton. This is set in an abandoned military hospital and is following a team of people who are trying to renovate this into flats, except the hospital and the potential hauntings there kind of have other plans. It's definitely very atmospheric. In places, this is slightly frustrating and it feels dated even though it was published in 2022, I think? Yeah, it's 2022. It definitely has some dated conversations in it. It feels like you're very much reading this through the male gaze in places, but other places not so much. So there's a little bit of frustration there. But the setting of this abandoned hospital, that alone is very creepy, but the idea of the kind of ghostly presence there and what our main characters are seeing and how it's affecting the characters as well, I did find gave it a creepy angle. I wanted to read this with the lights on. I'll say that much for it. That is all my horror book recommendations for you. This is just going to keep growing every year, isn't it, this list? I need to start narrowing it down, I think, but those are all the horror books that I wanted to tell you about today. I am reading a lot of horror throughout October, so if you would like to see those videos, please do subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified when I post them. Lots of vlogs coming your way. Obviously, we'll be reading horror outside of October, but it's the best month for it. November as well, I feel like I should make like honorary secondary spooky season, but there's just so much to read in October, almost like too much to read. I'm overwhelmed by how much I want to get to. And honestly, for this first part of the month, I've been feeling a little tiny bit slumpy, which is not the month for a slump. So I'm just going to kick that out the way and then get reading with as much horror as I possibly can. Thank you so much for watching this video, and thank you so much to my patrons for making all of my videos possible. I will see you in the next one.